So, more things on character development and stuff. Character here has a new variation and stuff. It's not how it was in the time of Elsie Lincoln Benedict and stuff. Elsie Lincoln Benedict took from what was basically empirically insufficient science and stuff, of physiognomy, and but here character has a new variation of a more up-to-date variation of how a person's physiology, their physical organism, mental organism and stuff, constructs the structure of their mind and their behaviors and everything and stuff. Though not all of that is explanatory of certain thoughts and behaviors and stuff, because, well, beliefs and perceptions and stuff affect it as well, and personality can be learned and stuff. A lot of our personality is based on our memory and stuff. This is shown in cases of dementia where people lose areas of their brain and stuff, lose their memory and stuff, and lose their personality and stuff, because their stored emotional reactions are gone. There's no storage. And so the storage and the connections are just not there anymore. You get rid of the gray matter, you get rid of the storage. You get rid of the white matter and stuff, you get rid of the connections. So, now here's some golden principles of character development and stuff. If you want it to develop more, you have to put wear on it and stuff. It takes grit, okay? You have to make it work hard. You have to rest, recuperate, or nourish it without abusing it. You have to respect your personal medical limits, okay? Not everybody is going to be able to do character development and stuff, or character maturity and stuff. Maturity is what you want and stuff. Development is like this perverted concept that is used by actors and stuff. Many actors cannot keep a character and stuff, which is sad. It sets a bad precedent. It sets a bad example and stuff. Yeah, but there's different, everybody has, certain medical or genetic limitations that prevent them from doing things. Like, say, for example, if somebody was very sarcopenic and they needed to the point where, like, it was actually destroying their psychology and stuff, their psyche, they would have to develop a lot of muscle and stuff. They're not going to be able to lift like other people who are developing muscle and stuff. Like, they could easily, sprains, tears, and stuff could easily happen. So there's that. So, but that propensity that you're developing, it can generate value for you because it will rise to the level of demand that is asked of it. This is part of the purpose of the body, including the brain. And in terms of plasticity, the brain is most plastic and stuff. And it's in the present economy, in this present era we're in, your brain creates more value than your body does and stuff. If you're doing physical work, you're moving stuff around and everything, blah, 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 you're not necessarily seeing good compensation for your time and energy spent, and you're likely spent after. And it just wears on your mind, drives you nuts and stuff. Most human beings have the genetics to make any component of themselves develop to rise to the occasion, to rise to meet the demand of work. No other life form on Earth really knows how to do this in a composed, organized fashion, but humans can do it because some entity primordially commissioned our emergence to discover information that will permanently guarantee the realization of the greatest works we can make, both individually and collectively. Okay? Whatever entity set the initial conditions for mankind's emergence and evolution and stuff has been feeding us information, gave us information and stuff, or allowed its realization to create all kinds of things. And if you go into my lessons on quantum theory, you kind of see what some of those things are. You know, technologies that would only remain fantasy unless the fundamentals were understood and the economic routes were understood and stuff. And of course, the necessity of it as well. Organism is always a possibility, okay? Not everybody has the histological buds or basis to develop to develop their best mature character and stuff. But adaptive genetics feeds towards organism and stuff. Like it provides for that. There's counter genes that kick in and stuff. You get bad genetic activity from things like UVB rays, and other forms of oxidative stress, genetic damage and stuff. But the body has mechanisms for healing for repairing the DNA and stuff. This is why keeping the body away from senescence and stuff is so crucial through things like proper diet, sleep, regular health screenings and stuff like that. Now, again, the third golden principle, being your own best friend, still rules here, okay? Being your own best friend is a very elaborate skill that spans a long time and many areas of life, but it's arguably the best skill a person can have. You expertly, through all kinds of capacities and stuff, kind of step outside of yourself and say, hey, I see you're in trouble. Let's get you from A to B, okay? That type of thing. Making results accessible for yourself is an act of self-humility that takes you there, okay? Basically elaborating and stuff on self-humility. Effacers are often psychologically poisonous, okay? People who say things to make you feel bad about yourself, okay? Or to just destroy your social face, which affects many people negatively. People who only think of you as you are, or anything other than what you could be, could never touch what you could be, okay? They can't, because they're dumb, okay? They don't control their frame and attitude of mind very well, okay? And they betray that stupidity with their mentality, okay? They create a psychological mold in your spirit that eats you within, and then the nadir is more likely, okay? Effacing remarks are not everyone's love language either and stuff. Some people genuinely find it funny to exchange insults and stuff. But hey, you just gotta like see what kind of crowd it is. But the brain has its own complications. Training the body is simple. Even cavemen successfully did it without realizing it and stuff. They were many of them were very active. They wrestled, they ran, they fought and stuff. They roughed it. They created demand for physical toughness and stuff. But many complete fools, complete repastes from the Neolithic past, know how to run themselves ragged, sleep like a bear in winter, eat clean, and then keep doing it to get really high athleticism or a mental boost and stuff. That will actually boost your body's BDNF levels and stuff, which can help the brain and helps other things that help the brain too. But the brain only gets its best development from a developed brain, and it gets this from these very intricate pursuits, okay? Heavy reading, learning, practice problems, puzzles, lots of types of physical exertion and stuff. Exercising and complex physical movements and stuff. And yeah, social events, thinking, creativity, other mental exercises, and many of them are covered in my upcoming book, Dieting Within Medical Limits, okay? The brain has an insatiable hunger for thinking, knowledge, etc. And once it gets free or builds up a mental muscle to do certain work, then that's where you see the insatiable hunger. It will happily work for you all day, handling whatever business or work, solving whatever problem, etc. Because it becomes like a big fat grizzly bear that just wants more meat and honey all day. You know, your brain will want book after book after book, and it's going to want to remember and learn and blah 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 constantly. And because this is kind of what human beings are meant to be. Human beings generally can take two divergent paths and stuff. The path of the flesh and stuff, the lower self, where we are constantly governed by our senses and reactions and everything, and constantly trying to force the issue and stuff, or by our mind and spirit and stuff. A mind that is energized and that it has good spirit and everything. So I talked about the evolution of mankind towards mind and spirit in um, previous lesson where I talked about the history of Africa and stuff, which is a period of which starts off at a period of human history about 250,000 years ago, which explains a lot of why many human cultures around the world um, do the things they do and stuff. And it adds a great puzzle, and it gives proper credit to the people, these lost and forgotten people and stuff, that invented a lot of the ideas that got the ball rolling, that were passed on to generations and stuff. You know, the first musicians, philosophers and stuff, first mathematicians, and uh, first doctors too, mystics. But the brain also gets enhanced dietarily from certain physical exercise and other things I mentioned in my upcoming books and stuff. Gross motor exercise doesn't really help the cerebrum, and it doesn't connect the cerebrum to the lower brain and stuff. It just doesn't. The brain and thorax are most central, okay? Once the heart and lungs are strong, the brain can do the same work but much faster and with more energy. It takes much less mistakes and encourages moral maturity. When the muscles become too dominant, it instills a compulsion for cruelty and violatory behavior. The person thinks to give the lie to any fact, no fact remains permanent, and the person forgets. When the heart and lungs get too strong, it scatters the thoughts, creates communicative decoherence, defeats plans, and disorganizes thinking. Okay? That is one of the hundreds, probably dozens of sources of attentional deficit disorder, okay, or attentional problems. But a person needs enough backbone for emotional stability, pacing, focus, and responsibility. A person needs strong muscles to get themselves across for the mind to realize its ideas, okay? When the liver is strong, the body keeps free of toxins and balances its 36 hormones, okay? And you can think of the body as like a dynamic engine of like, it's like an organism of engines and stuff that each fire in their own timing and pacing, and they're cued by different things and stuff. And fires and generally cyclical, but within that cycle, there's subcycles and stuff. And there's actuations and chemical reactions and stuff. Human beings are biomechanical, but they're also kind of like, but like in a sense of it, they're also divine too. Like there's a spirit. Uh, there's some aspect of themselves that's within them, connected to something, connected within us, connected to something greater and stuff, that taps into something greater. Though it's not really explicitly understood and stuff, and it's not really covered by empirical science, but it's a thing. It's it exists. Okay. Um, oh yeah, being mean, rude, or nasty ends up being at your expense. You know. So that's the final golden principle there. Um, yeah, that's another thing about character development.